It was near dusk when she stopped walking. Snow hadn't yet fallen, but the air had the weight of it, and her boots sank in dirt soft from the last hard rain. The wind came sharp across the flats, tearing through her shawl like it wasn't there. She stood a long while in the middle of the road, the hem of her skirt caked in drying mud, her son pressed to one hip, her daughter gripping two fingers on her free hand like she'd fall without them. The road ahead wound west until it vanished in the pale blue of the prairie sky, wide and cruel and quiet as the inside of a church. Her name was Lona Mae Campbell, and she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The child on her hip, Oliver, was too light for 2 years old. He hadn't cried in hours. Jenny, the older one, was 7, though she hadn't spoken since they'd left the last town. Not since that man with the long face and tobacco-stained teeth had looked her over like stock and offered Lona $2 for her same as for a mule. There was no wagon, no horse, just a wool blanket wrapped around all three of them and a flour sack slung over Lona's shoulder, holding a cracked tin cup, a damp flint, and what was left of a dry cornbread biscuit. The house they'd come from was ash now. Her husband's body was not. That had been 3 weeks ago, and she hadn't said his name since. He'd left them 100 acres of nothing but thistle and rock and one long scar across her ribs where his temper had finally turned sharp. She didn't bury him. Just watched the fire from down the hill children behind her and let the wind pull the smoke from the roof into the sky. Some men would call that justice. Some men would call it sin. She turned her face upward. The clouds were low and moving fast. She needed a place before nightfall. A barn. A shed. Any roof. Jenny coughed and Oliver's fingers twitched against her shoulder. They didn't know they were poor. Not really. They only knew they were cold. Her legs ached. Her breasts had dried up months ago. She had no money, no kin she could stomach calling on, and nothing left to pawn. The town of Grafton was 3 miles east, but she wouldn't go back there. Not after what happened behind the general store. There'd been a boy, maybe 15, skin and bones, who'd offered her a place in exchange for something she wouldn't give. Not even now. Not ever. Not with her children looking on. She'd shoved him away hard enough to draw blood from his nose, and the storekeep had come out screaming, calling her a whore, and a lunatic swinging a cane that caught her across the back. Jenny had seen that. She didn't look back when they left. Just walked west out past the river where the cottonwoods grew bent from the wind, past the carcass of a black sow rotting by the fence line, past the broken gate with the words CAMPBLL and SONS still nailed into the frame. Sons. She had a son now. Small and thin and quiet, but a son. Ahead, a dark shape rose against the failing sky, a structure of some kind, maybe a cabin or old storage barn. Her heart kicked up. If it was empty, they could stay the night. Just one night out of the wind. Maybe there'd be a fire pit or an old bed frame. Maybe a dry corner. She adjusted Oliver on her hip and picked up her pace boots, sucking through the soft earth. Jenny stumbled but didn't complain. As they got closer, Lona could see it was a homestead barely. 1 room. Roof sagging. Shutters hanging crooked. A chicken coop out back with no chickens, just bones and feathers. She knocked. Once. Nothing. She opened the door. No one lived there. Not now, now. She stepped inside. Cold but dry. A cast-iron stove against the wall. 2 broken chairs. A cot with no blanket. Still better than dirt. She set Oliver down and lowered Jenny onto the cot, brushing her hair back from her face. Her fingers trembled. She moved to the stove, pulled the flint from her sack, and started to strike it. Nothing. Again. Sparks, but no catch. The sun dropped fast behind the hills. She struck again. Nothing. And then a voice Behind her. Low. Male. Best not light that without checking the chimneys clear. Smoked out the place last time I tried. Lorna froze. She hadn't heard a horse. She turned slowly, hands still on the flint. The man stood just inside the doorway, tall and rangy, coat dusted with road and wear. His face was lean, creased around the eyes and mouth, the way wind and time marked a man who lived without much comfort. He didn't look surprised to see her, didn't reach for a weapon. Just tipped his hat off and held it low against his chest. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. "Didn't know it was occupied." Lorna said nothing. Her eyes flicked to the children. Jenny was sitting upright now, wide-eyed, her hand clenched around the cot frame. Oliver whimpered once, then buried his face in his hands. The man glanced at them, then back to Lorna. "I've been using this place off and on when I come through. Last time was over summer. Figured it was still empty." Still, she said nothing. He stepped farther in, slow. Not threatening, but not timid either. "You got a name?" She shook her head. "All right," he said, voice quieting. "Not asking trouble. Just need a place to stay till morning. Got some beans and flour in my saddlebag? I'll trade you a fire and some food for a corner to sleep in. That's fair, isn't it?" Still, she said nothing. He knelt near the stove, lifted the pipe cover, and squinted up into it. Bird nests gone. Should be clear now. He looked back at her. "Try again." Lorna struck the flint. This time the spark caught. A curl of smoke rose as flame licked the kindling. She fed it slowly, careful not to waste it. The warmth spread slow but sure. Oliver crawled closer, drawn by it, and Jenny followed, sitting cross-legged on the floor, knees tucked up to her chin. The man didn't speak for a while. He moved with quiet efficiency, unpacking a small canvas sack, pulling out a tin of beans, a hunk of bread, and a lopsided apple. He set the food near the stove and eased himself onto the floor far enough to show he meant no harm. "My name's Elias," he said. "Elias Burke. I come from down by Wichita. Used to work cattle. Not much call for that now, so I move around. Fix fences, mend shoes, trap when I can." Lorna looked at him hard. He didn't have a trapper's stink. No pelts. Just a knife on his belt and eyes that looked tired but not mean. "I'm not asking your business," he said. "A woman with 2 young uns out in this weather's got her reasons. I won't press." She spoke finally. Her voice cracked from disuse. "We ain't beggars." Elias nodded once. "Didn't say you were." She looked at the bread, then at her children. Jenny was watching her. Always watching, like if she looked hard enough her mother might become someone safe again. Lorna reached for the bread and broke it in half. Elias didn't stop her. Didn't move. They ate slow. The beans were warm and salty. The apple she saved for the morning. When the children slept curled beneath the shawl on the cot, Elias spoke again. "You're not from here." She didn't answer. "Most women don't come west unless they're chasing something or running from it." Her face didn't change, but something in her spine pulled tight. "I'm not judging," he added. "Just talking." He leaned back against the wall, eyes on the fire. "My brother was like that. Always running. Took off when he was 16. Said he'd make his fortune. Mama died waiting for him to come back. He never did." The fire cracked softly. Wind whistled through a gap in the boards. Elias tilted his head. "You got someone looking for you." Lorna closed her eyes. Thought of the grave behind the house, the one she hadn't marked. "No," she said. "Then you're free." She looked at him. His face wasn't smug, just plain. "You're cold, hungry, tired, but you're free. You get to decide what happens next." "Not many get that, miss." She didn't reply. The flames danced shadows across the rough plank walls. Outside the night grew thicker. Lona pulled the shawl tighter around the children, and for the first time in weeks she let her shoulders drop just a little. Morning came soft and gray, seeping through the slats in the boarded window like the world was trying not to disturb them. Lona stirred first. Her neck ached from the angle she'd slept sitting upright beside the cot. One hand had never left Oliver's back. She flexed her fingers now and looked toward the stove. The fire was out. The room was cold again. Elias was gone. For a moment fear pricked her until she saw the tin cup by the door. It held 3 eggs speckled brown, and beside it sat a folded scrap of cloth. Inside were pieces of dried meat and a coin. Not much, but more than she'd seen in months. Jenny blinked up at her. "Is he coming back?" Lona didn't know. She smoothed the girl's hair and helped her sit up. "We'll eat, then move on." They boiled the eggs using the last of the kindling and split the meat 3 ways. The coin, dull, heavy, Lona slipped into her skirt pocket. She didn't say thank you aloud, didn't pray, just chewed slow and steady eyes on the road she couldn't yet see. They walked north that day toward a place she'd heard of once where a woman named Mercy ran a boarding house and took in those with nowhere else to go. Lona didn't believe in charity, but she believed in women who'd been through fire and come out harder for it. The prairie stretched wide again, yellowed with winter grass, sky hanging low and close. They passed a dead hawk by the roadside. Jenny stared at it. "Why's it like that?" "Froze," Lona said. "Or starved. But it had wings." "Wings don't mean nothing if you can't find food." Jenny was quiet after that. They stopped to rest beneath a twisted oak, and Lona let herself lean against the trunk. Oliver napped in her lap, mouth slack, legs limp. Jenny picked at the bark with a stick. It was a picture Lona wanted to keep, though she didn't know why. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe the sound of Jenny humming, soft and tuneless, but alive. Near sundown they saw smoke curling above the rise. A cabin. No sound of livestock, no fence, no voices. But the roof was whole, and light showed through the chinks. Lona told the children to stay put and walked to the door. She knocked with her knuckles twice sharp. It opened part way. Elias stood there. His eyes narrowed, then softened. "I hoped you would," he said, and stepped aside. She didn't speak, just nodded once and guided her children inside. This place was better. A table with legs that didn't wobble. A shelf of jars, beans, dried apples, something pickled. A stack of wood by the stove already lit. It smelled of coffee and tobacco and pine. "You following me?" Elias asked, not unkindly. "No, just walking." He chuckled. "Well, you found me." He ladled hot water from a kettle into a cup and handed it to her. "Ain't much, but it's warm." Oliver took to the floor, scooting toward the heat. Jenny leaned into her mother's side. "You can stay here," Elias said after a moment. "A while. Till you figure out what you want." Lona didn't trust it. Not fully. She'd seen kindness sour too fast. "I don't keep house," she said. "Didn't ask you to." "I don't owe you." "Didn't say you did." The silence between them was hard but not cruel. More like something waiting to settle. She glanced at the stove. "You trap." "Used to. Now I mend, build, cook when I have to. Sell what I can in town." He gestured toward a stack of mended boots. "Folks come to me if they don't mind quiet." Lona sipped the water. "We'll sleep here tonight." Elias nodded. "That's fair." Jenny tugged at her sleeve. "Can we stay longer?" Lona looked down at her. Saw the pink in her cheeks, the light behind her eyes. She didn't answer. Not yet. Later that night Elias fixed cornbread and beans, and they ate at the table. He told a story about a mule that refused to cross a river until it saw a chicken do it first. Jenny laughed, and even Lona smiled. After the children slept, Elias sat by the fire, hands loose on his knees. "You've seen worse than most," he said. She didn't argue. "I ain't looking to fix anybody. Just don't mind the company now and then." She studied him a while. There was a wornness to him, but no bitterness. Just a quiet way of existing. He didn't ask about the man who'd marked her ribs. Didn't look at her like she was broken. She could live with that. She nodded once and stayed. Snow came 3 days later, sudden and hard, like the sky had given up waiting. It piled fast against the cabin walls, sealed the door at the bottom, and turned the world to silence. Lona watched it from the window, arms crossed, her breath fogging the glass. Inside it was warm. Elias kept the fire going, rising early each morning to split more wood. He didn't speak much, which suited her fine. But he'd built a shelf for the children's things, even though they barely had any. He fixed the cot so it didn't sway when Jenny rolled over. He carved a little horse from a scrap of pine and gave it to Oliver without a word. He asked nothing in return. Lona cleaned where she saw need. She mended a torn shirt of his. She found a rhythm to it, quiet and slow. At night, after the children slept, they sat at the table, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. One evening he poured her a cup of strong tea and said, "You carry yourself like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop." She met his eyes. "Because it always does." He gave a small nod. "Fair enough." She didn't trust ease. Not yet. But she stopped flinching when he stood too fast, and she no longer slept with her boots on. They stayed through December. Then January. Elias didn't ask her plans, and she didn't ask his. But she learned his habits. How he muttered to himself when sewing. How he checked the traps every other morning, bringing back rabbit or squirrel when luck held. How he always left the last slice of bread for the children. One night, as they dried near the fire after a hard snow, Jenny asked Elias if he had children. "No," he said softly. "Wanted them once. Long time ago." "What happened?" He looked at Lona before answering. "Sometimes folks don't want the same things." Jenny seemed to understand. Later, when Lona tucked her in, Jenny whispered, "He don't scare me." Lona touched her forehead. "Me neither." The thaw came slow but sure. In February, the creek near the cabin began to run again. Birds returned. Lona stood out back one morning and watched the melt drip from the roof. She thought of the road, thought of Mercy's boarding house still out there somewhere, thought of the grave by the burned house and the name she hadn't said in months. She didn't owe him anything. Not grief. Not silence. That night she told Elias everything. Not all at once, but in pieces, while the wind rattled the window and the stove glowed red. About the years of small bruises, the threats, the last blow that split her skin open like paper. About the fire. And not burying him. Elias didn't move. Didn't speak over her. When she finished, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he said. "I've been a coward. I've left when I should have stayed. But I've never raised a hand to someone smaller than me. You did what you had to do." She didn't cry. Just nodded. That night she slept easier. March brought change. A man came to the cabin, gruff, red-faced, riding a mule. Said he was from Grafton, recognized her. "You're Campbell's widow," he said. "Ain't you got folks back east?" She stood in the doorway, shoulders squared. "No one I'll go back to." The man eyed Elias. "She your trouble now?" Elias said nothing, just stood behind her. The man spat, mounted up, and left. They didn't speak of it again. But the next morning Elias said, "You and the children could stay if you wanted. Not just through the cold. For good." Lona didn't answer. She looked out the window, saw the creek running full now, trees budded, grass coming up green. She turned to him, eyes steady. "I won't belong to anyone," she said. "You won't have to," he replied. Spring stitched itself into the land slow and sure like a hand-sewn patch on an old shirt, uneven but holding. The world softened. Trees blushed, green birds returned in chorus, and the creek behind the cabin carried the cold meltwater out of the hills like it had a purpose. Lona found herself waking early, not out of fear but from habit, and rising to a kind of peace she didn't yet trust but didn't fight either. She'd taken to tending a small patch of dirt by the south wall of the cabin, turned the soil with her bare hands, testing it for life. Elias had built a box to frame it, said she could plant whatever she wanted. "Never grew anything that didn't die," she said. He shrugged. First time for everything. Oliver toddled now. He loved the feel of the earth, pressing his palms into it like it might give something back. Jenny talked more, laughed even. She followed Elias around the yard with the steady watchfulness of someone still measuring safety but willing to try again. Lona never asked about the past, but she listened when Elias offered pieces. A mother buried young, a brother who never returned, a woman once long gone. No children, no promises, just the quiet truth of someone who'd lost and kept going. They shared work, not sentiment, but there were moments when she caught him watching the children, or when his hands brushed hers at the table, when something unspoken stretched between them, taut and trembling. One afternoon, she stood out front with her hands on her hips, looking at the fence that barely stood. The wood leaned like tired men in the sun. "That fence is a mess," she said. Elias nodded. "Been meaning to fix it." "You got a hammer?" "Somewhere. I'll find it." And she did. She spent the day driving nails, setting new boards, her fingers blistered and raw. Elias helped, but he let her lead. Didn't take the hammer from her hands. Didn't tell her how to do it. At sunset they stood together, surveying the line of straight posts and new slats. "Looks like it might hold," he said. "It better." That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Lona sat by the fire, rubbing liniment into her hands. Elias watched her quietly. "You ever think about marrying again?" he asked low. She didn't answer right away, just looked at the fire. "I used to think marriage was a chain," she said. "A weight to carry. Now I think it's just two people choosing not to leave." He nodded slow. "I wouldn't leave," he said, "if you asked me to stay." She looked at him, then really looked. Her hands, still rough from work, rested on her lap. "You already did," she said. He didn't touch her, just sat with her while the fire burned low. Days passed. The garden came up. Beans, potatoes, wild greens. Jenny carved little figures from bark. Oliver learned to say Ma and Eli. Lona began baking again, real bread, warm and thick, using a recipe she thought she'd forgotten. One morning she found a small ring on the table, twisted wire polished smooth. Elias had left early, gone to trade in town. No note. No explanation. She held the ring in her palm a long while, heart tight. When he returned that evening, dusty and sun-flushed, he didn't say a word. Just looked at her. She raised her hand. The ring was already on her finger. "You sure?" he asked. "Yes." Outside, the children laughed in the yard. Inside, the fire caught and flared, and Lona May Campbell, widowed, homeless, and once desperate, stood tall in the center of her own quiet life, no longer just surviving but choosing. Summer settled in like it meant to stay. Long days stretched over golden fields, and nights brought soft winds through the open windows. The cabin no longer felt like shelter, it felt like home. Not in the way she'd known before, but in a quieter, stronger way. Built not from land or name or law, but from care, from presence, from staying. Lona kept planting tomatoes, corn, late lettuce. She taught Jenny how to weed between the rows, to feel for the stem and not just pull. Oliver ran barefoot, dirt caked to his ankles, babbling nonsense that sounded like joy. Elias added a second room to the cabin, said the children would need space of their own soon. Lona watched him work from the porch, her mending in her lap, wondering when she'd started thinking in seasons, not weeks. Wondering when she'd stopped waiting for the end. One morning a letter came, carried by a rider from town, dusty and impatient. He handed it over and rode off without a word. Elias stood with it in his hand, turning it over once before giving it to her. Her name was written on the front, Campbell. Her stomach tightened. She sat down before she opened it. The handwriting was stiff, formal. A lawyer, her husband's cousin, said there was a matter of land title unresolved, said if she was alive and still bore the name she was entitled to it. Entitled, she muttered, like it's a prize. Elias read it, then folded it careful. You don't have to answer, he said. She looked up at him. But it's your land. She shook her head. It's not. Not anymore. Could be. She looked out toward the trees, the low fence, the garden growing slow and steady behind the cabin. She thought of that burned house, the hollow sound of wind in empty rooms. Thought of what her name had meant then and what it meant now. It had cost me more than it's worth, she said. He nodded. A week later another visitor came. A woman, this time 40, maybe older, with boots that had walked a long way and a scar across her cheek that said she hadn't been afraid to fight. She asked for Lona by name. I'm from the Mission Ridge Women's Co-op, she said. Mercy sent me. Said you might need a place. Lona shook her head. I've got one. The woman smiled like she'd expected that. She said you might also want to help. Lona frowned. There's a girl, 14, lost her folks in the flood east of Dodge. Been fending for herself. Got grit but no place. Lona felt the weight of it settle over her chest. Jenny came out onto the porch, then her small figure silhouetted in the doorframe. The woman looked from Jenny to Lona. You'd be good for her? And I think she'd be good for you. Later, after supper, Lona sat beside Elias while the children slept. She told him what the woman had said. You thinking about it? He asked. I don't know. She paused. She's not mine. Neither was I, he said quiet. She looked at him, then down the hall where her children lay breathing soft in their beds. I said I wouldn't belong to anyone, she said. And you don't, Elias replied. But they can belong to you. If you want them to. She thought about that. About how far she'd come. About what she could offer now. I think I do, she said. The girl arrived 3 days later. Thin, bruised eyes, hard as flint. Didn't say a word, not even when Jenny offered her a slice of apple. Lona didn't press. She just set out a cot, a wash basin, and a clean shirt. Later that night, as Elias stoked the fire and Oliver snored softly against the wall, the girl crept out and sat at the edge of the porch. Lona followed, sitting beside her in the dark. They didn't speak, just watched the stars rise over the fields, the world still and wide. Lona reached into her pocket, pulled out a small carved horse Oliver's forgotten in the dirt, and handed it to her. The girl turned it in her hand, silent, but her shoulders dropped a little. It was a beginning, and in the warm hush of that summer night, Lona knew this was the life she'd chosen. Not forced, not borrowed. Hers. If the land felt alive, subscribe and keep listening.